Advanced Math, ladies, this is lesson 1.3b. If you will look at number 49, it has negative I square root of 2 minus 2 minus 6 minus 4I square root of 2 minus 5 minus I square root of 2. We have to distribute the negative through each of the parentheses. So this negative would be distributed to the 5 and to the negative I square root of 2. So that gives us negative I square root of 2 minus 2 minus 6 plus 4I square root of 2 minus 5 plus I square root of 2. If you will look, these two will cancel, so we only have 4I square root of 2 left. Then negative 2 minus 6 minus 5 is negative 13. Okay, now if you will look at number 65, it has 3I times 2 minus I squared. When you see one written with a square, that means you're going to have to write it twice so that you don't forget the middle term that is a result of foiling. So you'll have 3I. Now 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative I is negative 2I. Negative I times 2 is negative 2I. Negative I times negative I is plus I squared. If you'll remember from Advanced Math 1, I squared is always equal to a negative 1. So that gives us 3I times 4 minus 1 is 3 minus 4I. Now we can distribute 3I times 3 is 9I. 3I times negative 4I is negative 12I squared. But again, I squared is negative 1. So negative 12 times negative 1 is 12 plus 9I. If you will look at number 70, you have 14 plus 5I over 3 plus 2I. When we multiply, or when we divide, we have to multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate is a twin, except that the i's are different. So the sign on the first number is the same, but the sign on the second number has to be the opposite. Now we're ready to FOIL. 14 times 3 is 42. 14 times negative 2 is negative 28I. 5I times 3 is 15I. 5I times negative 2I is negative 10I squared. Then on the bottom, you'll have 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative 2I is negative 6I. 2I times 3 is plus 6I. 2I times negative 2I is negative 4I squared. Once again, the I squared is a negative 1. So negative 10 times negative 1 is positive 10 plus 42 is 52. Negative 28I plus 15I is negative 13I. On the bottom, the 6i's cancel. I squared is negative 1, so negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4, plus 9 is 13. You may not recognize it right off, but the numerator has a common factor of 13. So we could do the reverse distributive property or factor it, so that's 13 times 4 minus I divided by 13. Well, the 13s cancel, so your final answer is 4 minus I. If you look at number 79, you have 2 over 3I. A lot of students initially say, well, I can't do a conjugate of this. Yes, you can, because it has an I, so you can do the opposite sign on I, which is negative 3I. And we can multiply top and bottom by it because this is a big 1. So then when you distribute, 2 times negative 3I is negative 6I. 3I times negative 3I is negative 9I squared. But again, I squared is negative 1, so negative 9 times negative 1 is 9. And on top you have negative 6I, which will reduce to negative 2I over 3. The instructions said to put it in standard form. So in standard form, you must have a real and imaginary part. So that would be 0 minus 2I over 3. I will not count either one of these incorrect, but you could run into a professor who would. So be sure you read the instructions. Okay, the next part talks about Ohm's law. Ohm's law is used in physics to compare the difference between voltage, current, and impedance. E is for voltage, I is for current, Z is for impedance, which is the resistance to current. And although the problems on this section look very scary, they're really not too bad. Because number 82, they give you the current, which is I, of 20 plus 12I. And they give you the impedance of 10 minus 5I. So all you're doing is multiplying complex numbers at this point. So 20 times 10 is 200. 20 times negative 5I is negative 100I. 12I times 10 is 120I. And 12I times negative 5I is negative 60I squared. As we've said several times already, I squared is negative 1. So negative 1 times negative 60 is 60, plus 200 is 260. And then if you combine negative 100I plus 120I, that leaves plus 20I. The other thing we need to review is the powers of I. If you have I to the 0, that is equal to 1, because anything to the 0 power is 1. I to the 1 is 1. I to the 2 is square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, which is the square root of negative 1 squared. And when you take the square root of something squared, it's just what's on the inside, so that would be a negative 1. Then I to the 3 would be I to the 1 times I to the 2. Well, I to the 1 is I don't know why I put a 1 there, I'm sorry, is I squared is negative 1, so that's a negative 1I. I to the 4th is I squared times I squared. Well, I squared is negative 1 times negative 1 equals positive 1. And if you'll remember from the fall semester, you go from I to the 0, I to the 1, which is an I squared, which is negative 1, I cubed is negative I to the 4th is positive 1, I to the 5th is I to the 6th is negative 1, and so forth. It repeats continuously from there. If you will look at number 86, it has I to the 29th. The way I showed you to work these is to take the exponent, which is 29, divide it by 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Sorry. Let's try this again on 86. We have I to the 29th. You need to take 29 divided by